Hello everyone, Kid here, back on the video. Today I'm going to be part 2 of this BRUSHABER versus Union Pacific Railway court case here. So yeah, I'm going to start lift up where we left off, and I've linked down this document down in the description below along with our PayPal. You can email us for consultation at themullings@gmail.com. I'll leave it down in the description below. So anyway, let me get right into this. Upon the uplapsing sorry, some of the words in here. Uplasting of a considerable period after repeal of the income tax laws referred to in an act which passed laying a tax on incomes from all classes of property and other sources of revenue which was not appropriated, and which therefore was of course assumed to come within the classification of exercises, duties, and imposts which were subject to the rule of uniformity, but not to the rule of apportionment. The constitutional validity of this law was challenged on the ground that it did not fall within classes of exercises, duties, and imposts, but was direct in the constitutional sense. It was therefore void and for want of apportionment. And that question came to this court, and that was passed in Pollock versus Farmers Loan and Tea Corporation. The court, fully recognizing in the passage which we have previously quoted the all-embracing character of the two great classifications, including on the one hand direct taxes to apportionment, and on the other exercises, duties, imposts, and subject to uniformity, held the law to be unconstitutional and subject for these reasons, concluding that the classification of direct and adopted for the purpose of rendering it impossible to burden by taxation accumulations of property real or personal, except subject to the regulation of apportionment. It was held that the duty existed to fix what was a direct tax in the constitutional sense, so as to accomplish this purpose contemplated by the Constitution. Coming to consider the validity from the tax from this point of view, while not questioning at all the common understanding, it was direct merely on income and only indirect on property. It was held that considering the substance of things, it was direct on property in a constitutional sense, since to burden an income by a tax was, from a point of substance, to burden the property from which the income was derived, and thus accomplish the very thing which the provision as to apportionment from direct taxes was adopted to prevent. As this conclusion but enforced to regulation as to the mode of exercising power under these particular circumstances, it did not in any way dispute the all-embracing taxing authority possessed by Congress, including necessarily herein the power to impose income taxes if it only confirmed the constitutional regulations which are applicable to them. Moreover, in addition, the conclusion reached the Pollock case did not involve that income taxes generally and necessarily came with the class of direct taxes on property, but on the contrary, recognized the fact that taxation on income was in its nature an exercise entitled to be enforced as such, unless it was concluded to enforce it would amount to accomplishing the result which the requirement as to apportionment the direct taxation was adopted to prevent, in which case the duty would arise to disregard form and consider substance alone. Hence subject the tax to the regulation to apportionment, which otherwise would not apply to it. Nothing could serve to make this clearer than to recall in that Pollock case, insofar as the law taxed incomes from other classes of property than real estate and invested personal property, that is, income from professional trades, employments, or vocations, its validity was recognized. Indeed, it was expressly declared that no dispute was made upon the subject, and attention was called to the fact that taxes on such incomes has been sustained and exercised taxes in the past. The whole law was, however, declared unconstitutional on the ground that it had to permit to it thus operate would relieve real estate invested personal property from taxation, and will leave on the burden of the tax to be borne by professions, trades, employments, or vacations, and in any way that was intended on a tax on capital would remain in substance a tax on occupations and labor, a result which it was held could not have been contemplated by the Congress. This is the text of the amendment. The Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes on incomes from whatever source derived, without apportionment among the several states, and without regard to any census or immemoriation. It is clear on the face of this text that it does not support to confer power to levy income taxes in a generic sense, an authority already possessed and never questioned, or to limit and distinguish between one kind of income taxes and another, but that the whole purpose of the amendment was to relieve all income taxes when imposed from apportionment from a consideration of the source whence the income was derived. Indeed, in the right of history which we have given, and the decision in the Pollock case, and the ground upon which the ruling in the case was based, there is no escape from the conclusion that the amendment was drawn for the purpose of doing away for the future with the principle which the Pollock case was decided. That is, determining whether a tax on the income was direct, not by a consideration of the burden placed on the tax income upon which is directly operated, but by taking into view the burden which resulted on the property from which the income was derived. Since in express terms, the amendment provides that income taxes from whatever source the income may be derived shall not be previously noticed concerning the assumed limitations to be implied from the language of the amendment as to nature and character of the income taxes, which is authorized, find no support in the text and are in inconciliable conflict with the very purpose which the amendment was adopted to accomplish. Second, that the contention that the amendment treats a tax on income as a direct tax authority relieved from apportionment and is necessarily therefore not subject to the rule of uniformity. Such as rule only applies to taxes which are not direct, thus destroying the two great classifications which have been recognized and enforced from the beginning, and is also wholly without foundation, since the command of the amendment that all taxes shall be subject to apportionment by a consideration of the sources from which the taxed income may not be derived, forbids the application to such taxes of the rule applied in the Pollock case, by which alone taxes were removed from the great class of exercises, duties, and imposts subject to the rule of uniformity, and replaced under the other or direct class. This must be unless it can be said all through the Constitution, as a result of the amendment in express terms, excludes the creation of source of income. That creation yet remains for the purpose of destroying the classification of the Constitution by taking exercise out of class to which it belongs and transferring it to a class which it cannot be placed consistently with the requirements of the Constitution. Indeed, from another point of view, the amendment demonstrates that no such purpose was intended. On the contrary, shows that it was drawn with the object of maintaining the limitations of the Constitution and harmonizing their operation. We say this because it is to be observed that all through from the date of the Hilton case, because of its statements made in the opinions of that case, it had come to be accepted that direct taxes in the constitutional sense were confined to taxes levied directly on that real estate because of its ownership. The amendment contains nothing repudiation or challenging the ruling of the Pollock case that the word direct had a broader significance, since it embraced also taxes levied on directly on personal property because of its ownership, and therefore the amendment at least impliedly makes such wider significance as part of the Constitution, a condition which clearly demonstrates that the purpose is not to change existing interpretation except the extent necessary to accomplish the result intended, that is, the prevention of the resort to the resources from which a taxed income was derived in order to cause a direct tax on the income to be a direct tax on the source itself, and hereby to make an income tax of the class of exercises, duties, and imposts, and place it in the class of direct taxes. We come then to ascertain the merits of many contentions made in the light of the Constitution as it now stands, that is to say, including within its terms the provisions of the 16th Amendment as correctly interpreted. We first dispose of two propositions assailing the validity of the statute on the one hand because of its repugnancy to the Constitution in other respects, and especially because its enactment was not authorized by the 16th Amendment. The statute was enacted October 3, 1913, and provided for a general yearly income tax from December to December of each year. Exceptionally, however, it fixed a first period embracing only the time from March 1st to December 31st, 1913, and this limited retroactivity is assailed as repugnant due process clause of the Fifth Amendment and inconsistent with the 16th Amendment itself. But the date of the retroactivity did not extend beyond the time when the amendment was operative, and there can be no dispute that there was power by virtue of the amendment during that period to levy the tax without apportionment, and so far the limitations of the Constitution and other aspects are concerned. The contention is not open, since in Stockdale versus Atlantis, in sustaining a provision in prior income tax law which was assailted because of its retroactive charter, it was said, the right of Congress to have imposed this tax by a new statute, or through the measure of it was governed by the income of that past year, cannot be doubted. Much less can it be doubted that it could impose such a tax on the income of that current year. The part of that year had elapsed when the statute was passed. The joint resolution of July 4th, 1864, imposed a tax of 5% on all income of that previous year, although one tax on it had already been paid, and no one doubted the validity of the tax or attempted to resist it. The statute provides that the tax should not apply to unrelated organizations or corporations such as labor, agriculture, or horticultural organizations, mutual saving banks, etc. And the argument is that as the amendment authorized the tax on incomes from whichever source derived, by implication it excluded the power to make these exemptions. But this is only a form of expressing the erroneous contention as to the meaning of the amendment, which we have not already disposed of. And so far, this alleged illegality is based on other provisions of the Constitution. The contention is also not open, since it was expressed, considered, and disposed in Flint versus Stone Tracy. Without expressly stating all other contentions, we summarize them to a degree inadequate to enable us to typify and dispose of all of them. 1. The statute levies one tax called a normal tax on all incomes of individuals up to $20,000, and from that amount up by gradations, a progressively increasing tax called an additional tax is imposed. No tax, however, is levied upon the incomes of unmarried individuals amounting to $3,000 or less, nor upon incomes of married persons amounting to $4,000 or less. The regressive tax and the exempted amounts, it has said, are based on wealth alone, and the tax therefore repugnant to the due process of the clauses of the Fifth Amendment. Alright, I'm ending off here, and I'll come back with you guys with part 3 of this. Should be the last part. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.